Today I wanted to do something that I've never done on my channel before. So today I'm going to be doing the Resident Evil characters tier list. This tier list will actually be the protagonists of Resident Evil, so that's why you won't see characters like Albert Wesker or Nemesis. But let's go ahead and get started here with Catherine Warren, or better known as the Mayor's daughter from Resident Evil 2. There isn't really much about this character, but I went ahead and put her in the C rank, which I think is pretty generous of myself. The reason why I put her in the C rank is because her game mode Runaway in the Resident Evil 2 Remake DLC, which you're seeing here, was actually very fun to play. Now moving on to Bruce McGivern from Resident Evil Dead Aim. I went ahead and put Bruce McGivern in the B rank because Resident Evil Dead Aim was not only one of my favorite games as a kid, but it is still one of my favorite Resident Evil games to this day. Now we have one of the best characters in all of Resident Evil, which is going to be our first S rank character, Jill Valentine. Jill goes a long way in being one of the best characters of Resident Evil, in more ways of just being a master of unlocking. She's the one responsible for taking out the toughest tyrant in Resident Evil, Nemesis, so that goes a long way. Next up we have, in my opinion, the most underrated character in all of Resident Evil, Hunk. Hunk is going to be our first person in the A rank, but I still believe that we could see more from him in the future, so he has potential to be an S rank character. Next up we have a certified S rank Resident Evil character, which is Leon S. Kennedy. Leon I'm going to have to go ahead and put at the very top of the S rank because I grew up as a big Leon fan. I started with Resident Evil 2 and then I went on to Resident Evil 4, but at that point I had just progressed on to any Resident Evil game that included Leon because I was obsessed with anything that involved him. So as a kid, Leon was definitely my favorite character of all time, and I think it's safe to say that he still is. Next up we have Leon's partner from Resident Evil 6, Helena Harper. I went ahead and put Helena at the top of the B rank because she did serve as a really nice partner to Leon S. Kennedy, but she was only ever seen in RE6, so we don't really know much of her. Next up we have our very first character making the D rank, which is the Forgotten Soldier from the Resident Evil 2 Remake DLC. As much as I've got nothing against him as a character, the only reason I put him in the D rank is because his game mode was actually one of the hardest ones in my opinion. Now we have our first F rank character, which is Ark Thompson from Resident Evil Gun Survivor. He served just as little purpose as the game did itself. But then they made it out to seem that Ark's best friend was Leon S. Kennedy, leaving Ark looking like an absolute clown. Now don't worry guys, not many characters are going to go in the never heard of them tier, but there is only a couple of characters in Resident Evil Outbreak that I actually know, and this is one of them. I went ahead and put Kevin at the top of the C tier because I know that he is portrayed as probably the main character of Resident Evil Outbreak, if I'm not mistaken. But I also have very little knowledge of Outbreak, so I could be wrong. But next up we have Resident Evil's golden boy, Chris Redfield, which I'm going to be putting right up there in the S rank next to Leon Kennedy. Chris Redfield definitely takes the cake for being in the most numbered Resident Evil games, but also probably the most Resident Evil games just in general for that matter. I was always a big fan of Resident Evil 5 as a kid, and that game helped give me the impression that Chris Redfield was a badass boulder punching dude. I still really enjoy him as a character, but I can agree with the rest of the fans that I think we've seen enough of Chris Redfield as of late. Now we will be moving on to the former Starsfield medic, Rebecca Chambers. Rebecca Chambers definitely deserves an A rank in my opinion, and it's actually very crazy just how long we've gone in the Resident Evil timeline without seeing or hearing of Rebecca Chambers. Resident Evil 0 and Resident Evil 1 were the games that we got to see Rebecca shine in the most, but it was pretty lackluster to just have her as a playable character in RE5 Mercenaries. Now moving on to Chris Redfield's little sister, Claire Redfield. I went ahead and put Claire right there in the S rank in between Chris and Jill. A lot of fans of Resident Evil, including myself, think that Claire has not been featured in enough Resident Evil games, but I will say for the couple of Resident Evil games that she appears in, they are some really good RE games. Now moving on to Sheva Alomar, and like I said previously, I'm a big fan of Resident Evil 5, so I gotta put Sheva in the A rank, right next to Hunk. I believe Sheva is another very underrated character in which she only appears in Resident Evil 5, and we don't really get to know much about her backstory. But now we have Jake Mueller from Resident Evil 6. I put Jake right there in the A rank because I believe Jake is also another very underrated character in Resident Evil. But now moving on to the less so underrated characters of Resident Evil, we have Fong Ling from Resident Evil Dead Aim. I put Fong Ling right there in the B rank next to Bruce because my feelings about both of those characters are pretty mutual. I enjoyed the game a whole lot, so I think both characters deserve the B rank. Next we have Tofu from Resident Evil 2. I put Tofu in the D rank because, well, Tofu is definitely a unique character to say the least. His little game mode is extremely hard to do, so I have to put him in the D rank, but I will move him up to the top of it. And like I said previously, now you see me here kind of just moving all the Resident Evil Outbreak characters to the never heard of them tier, and moving on with my day. And now we're talking about Billy Cohen from Resident Evil 0. I went ahead and put Billy right at the top of the C rank because he does go on to be a really cool character, and he does go on to help Rebecca Chambers in Resident Evil 0 quite a bit. The only thing that sucks about Billy is after the events of Resident Evil 0, he mysteriously disappeared, leaving us fans not knowing what happened to Billy. But anyways, I had one more character to move to the never heard of them tier from Resident Evil Outbreak before moving on to an actual character I do know, Ethan Winters from Resident Evil Biohazard and Resident Evil Village. I went ahead and put Ethan Winters in the S rank tier, even though after playing Resident Evil 7 for the first time, I did not care about Ethan whatsoever. But after you play as him through the entirety of Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil 8, seeing his story with Rose makes you kind of feel for him as a character. Now next up we have Kendo from Resident Evil 2 and technically Resident Evil 3. I went ahead and put Kendo in the C rank, even though I know a lot of fans do seem to care for the character Kendo. They did add to Kendo as a character in the Resident Evil 2 and 3 remakes, but I still think that he serves very little purpose in the Resident Evil storyline. In the original, the only purpose he serves is technically grabbing his weapon after he dies. Now we have one of my favorite Resident Evil characters of all time, so this is a certified S rank character, Ada Wong. In Resident Evil, Ada dated an Umbrella researcher by the name of John, who worked at the Arkley facility underneath the Spencer mansion. He actually uses Ada's name as his password for his computer, which we then go on to see in Resident Evil 1. Capcom must have had huge plans for using Ada as a character because they were already name-dropping her in their very first Resident Evil game ever. And when they finally did start to use Ada as a character, we got to see firsthand that she is easily one of the most badass female characters in all of Resident Evil history. Now next we have Sherry Birkin, who first originally appeared in Resident Evil 2. I'm gonna have to put Sherry in the A rank, bumping her right past her partner in Resident Evil 6, Jake Mueller. Sherry Birkin as a character hasn't really been seen much, but for what we've seen of her, it does feel like we know a lot about her as a character. We've only seen Sherry in 2 of the Resident Evil games, but we got to see her go from being just a little defenseless girl to one of the smartest characters in Resident Evil that also has regenerative powers. So, like I said, there's only 2 Outbreak characters that I actually know, and this is the next one, Yoko. I put Yoko in the D rank because I know very little about Yoko, which made me nearly want to put her in the never heard of them tier. The only thing I know about Yoko is that when people play Outbreak, they use her a lot, so if I were to play it myself, I'd probably go in with her. Alright, but next up we have Piers Nivens from Resident Evil 6. I'm gonna go ahead and put Piers right there in the B rank. I never actually really did enjoy this section of Resident Evil 6 that much, but I will say that Piers did suit Chris as a very nice partner. It is very unfortunate that Piers had to infect himself with the C virus, but he did go on to be the most heroic one, all in all. Now, next up on the tier list we have Natalia from Resident Evil Revelations 2. I put Natalia in the C rank because I didn't think she was the best character. They kind of left her feeling anonymous and still wondering whether or not she was good or evil. And not only that, but when you actually play as her, you're very limited to actually what you can do combat-wise in the game. So it definitely does not make her that entertaining. But anyways, next up we have Rose Winters from Resident Evil Village. I was kind of struggling to get her to the top of the B rank, but that's where I am placing Rose. She definitely went on to have one of the most elaborate and unique DLC game modes in all of Resident Evil history. But with how young and new she is in the Resident Evil timeline, we still have a chance to see a lot more from her in the near future. This DLC actually also made me like Ethan more as a character as well, so I'll definitely have to give it some bonus points for that. Next up on the tier list now we have Carlos Oliveira from Resident Evil 3. I went ahead and put Carlos right there in the A rank because I actually think Carlos is one of the most underrated characters in all of Resident Evil. I think between the original and the remake of Resident Evil 3, they made Carlos out to be a really good character. But of course, that was the only time Carlos was featured in a Resident Evil storyline, even though we went on to see that he survived and is completely alright after Raccoon City. But anyways, next up, as you see, is already in the F rank, Keith from Resident Evil Revelations 1. For some reason, this tier list decided to include Keith, but not his partner Quint, or whatever his name is, so I'm gonna have to put him in the F rank. Now moving on, we have Josh Stone from Resident Evil 5. I went ahead and put Josh right up there in the B rank, right next to Rose, because this is another character that I would wish to see more of in the future. Josh Stone in Resident Evil 5 actually went on to be a huge helping hand to Chris, Sheva, and even Joe Valentine. And after the events of Resident Evil 5, he not only helped Jill, Chris, and Sheva all get out of there safely, but he even got out of there safely himself too. So it shows that he is definitely still alive and well. So that is officially the last Resident Evil 5 character we have to talk about on this tier list. And now we will be moving on to Steve Burnside from Resident Evil Code Veronica X. I ended up putting Steve right there in the C rank right next to Billy Cohen because I wasn't too sure how I felt about him as a character. Throughout the storyline of Resident Evil Code Veronica, he has some real silly one-liners and quotes that really make you question him as a person. But then when you can look past all that stuff, you not only start to feel bad for the downfall of him, but also the fact that he had to kill his own father. Not only that, but him and Claire definitely shared some really good moments throughout the entirety of Resident Evil Code Veronica, which does also really make you feel for him as a character, but it is pretty crazy that he only features in this one little side game of Resident Evil. So now moving on, we have the last character of Revelations 1, that is Parker. I put him right there in the F rank, right in between Ark and Keith. All I really know about Parker as a character is that he is a BSAA member and a former member of FBC. And also, if I'm not mistaken, I think Parker may have had a crush on Joe Valentine, but then again, they could have had mutual feelings for all I know. Even though it looks like he plummets into an entire bed of fire, he's presumed to still be alive, so maybe they'll still do something with him in the future if they ever end up doing Resident Evil Revelations 3. But who knows? Until then, we will be moving on to our final character on this tier list, which is Moira Burton from Resident Evil Revelations 2. I put Moira Burton right smack in the middle of the B rank because I did really like her as a character, but her presence in the timeline of Resident Evil is very small. It's awesome that they were able to incorporate Barry's daughter in some way in this game, and the storyline in between them is really cool as well. But then again, there isn't much else to say about Moira because the time spent playing as her is very slim. It is very unfortunate that whoever originally made this tier list did not add more of the Revelations 2 characters, because I would have loved to have just talked about this game more than what I got to. But of course, that is going to go ahead and wrap up my Resident Evil characters tier list. At the end of each tier list, I like to review my tier list to make sure you guys see exactly how I feel about these characters. So starting off at the top in the S rank, we have Leon, Ada, Chris, Claire, Jill, and Ethan. Now the A rank, we have Hunk, Sheva, Rebecca, Sherry, Ashley, Jake Mueller, and Carlos. The B rank, we have Rose, Josh, Helena, Moira, Bruce, Fong Ling, and Pierce. The C rank, we have Billy, Steve, Kevin, the mayor's daughter, Kendo, and Natalia. The D rank, I put Tofu, the Forgotten Soldier, and Yoko. Then at the F rank, I have Ark Thompson, Parker, and Keith. Then of course, lastly, I have those 6 Resident Evil Outbreak characters that I don't recognize. That was definitely one of my favorite Resident Evil tier lists to have made on this channel, and I hope you guys enjoyed it as well. Of course, go crazy down in the comments and let me know if you agreed or disagreed on any parts of this tier list. Lastly, hit subscribe as I post Resident Evil Reverse videos daily so you guys don't miss a single upload. But you guys already know how it goes. Make sure you hit like, subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next video tomorrow. Peace.